Hey there everyone, this is Robert with Reading Through History, and I'm back for the final installment in this video series dealing with the settlement of the plains, the conflict on the plains, and the assimilation of the Native American Indians. I cut the last video short because I'm trying to keep these videos short and to the point. So in the last one we did get the Dawes Act, we did get the destruction of the buffalo, and we got the assimilation of the Native American Indians, but we did not get to the final part, which is dealing with the resistance leaders. And this one's going to be kind of difficult because what the heck are these people who write these standards even talking about? We don't know. We seriously do not know. Because the first one that they mention is Chief Seattle. Now Seattle, that's just what the white man called him. He had another Native American name which is pretty impronounceable, so the textbooks usually just call him Seattle. And if you look down here on the date, March of 1854, they want you to know something about this speech, which I find quite odd and very irritating because they are literally not supposed to ask you about anything that happened prior to Reconstruction starting. That's like where the test is supposed to start, at least in the state I'm from. And they make reference to Chief Seattle's speech and they say be familiar with Chief Seattle's speech. So I'm like, okay, and I go find Chief Seattle's speech and I see 1854 and I'm thinking, dude, you're off, but we'll go with it. So I look into the speech, and this speech is highly contested. I mean, people say the stuff that is accredited to Chief Seattle, it's very likely this guy never even said this because he was speaking his native tongue. And by the way, they want you to, apparently this was a huge guy, like a really big guy, like 6'2" big. And apparently when he gave this speech, he put his hand on the shoulder of the representative of the white man who he was speaking to. And I mean, there's like 5 different versions of this speech, and none of them are the same, hence the different versions. But there's all kinds of arguments over whether or not this guy actually said what they claim that he said. But he was out there talking about his native lands with the white man, so okay. And as I said, this speech has been translated over and over and over again. Now, apparently he was a very eloquent person. We'll give him that. He gets credit for that. But in this speech, he reportedly thanked the Europeans, the white man, for their generosity. And he was like, oh yeah, you guys are so great and you can have this land. And apparently he was overtly gracious for everything the white man had actually done for he and his tribe. And the only thing that this guy really wanted for the white man to concede to him was like, hey, let the Native Americans visit their ancient ancestral burial grounds. So I don't really know what they're getting at here. Maybe that in the early part of this era, there was a lot of cooperation. And of course promises were made to Seattle and his men, just like with all these other tribes. So I don't really know what they're getting at here because A, it's out of the time frame. B, it's highly contested whether or not he actually said this. So I don't really know. So just think about Chief Seattle, very eloquent, trying to work with the white man, and that's about all I've got. Because like I said, it's kind of a mystery to me. Now the Cooper Union speech, if you actually go to Google and just type in Cooper Union speech, this is in New York. Apparently there's been a lot of Cooper Union speeches, including by Abraham Lincoln. So just like, Lincoln, Lincoln, Lincoln. So you have to type in Chief Red Cloud, Cooper Union speech. Now he traveled across the country, visited the East Coast, and this guy was a war chief. And he's one of very few war chiefs that are actually going to survive. I mean, we know what happened to Sitting Bull. We know what happened to Crazy Horse and a whole host of other Native American Indians who actually tried to fight the United States government. Now, this guy was a war chief, but he was always trying to cooperate. When the first gold rush was going on in the Black Hills, he was working with the government saying, please keep these people off because I can't control the young warriors. They're going to try to defend this. And he was always trying to negotiate. And in this speech, it is a very long speech in terms of some of these others, not incredibly long, But he went out there and he basically talked about the despair of the tribe, how much they were suffering, how the U.S. government wasn't living up to their promises, how the young men were wanting to leave the reservation and basically go and try to find food. And he talked in great deal about the Indian agents and the corruption, how the people that the United States sent out there with the Bureau of Indian Affairs to work with the tribe and take care of the tribe were all a bunch of crooked thieves, and they were stealing the supplies that were supposed to go to the Indians, and they were selling them and making a huge profit. And all of this is very true. I mean, this was a huge problem in the fact that the government officials who were sent out there were crooked. They were always stealing, and you're like supposed to get 50 barrels of flour, and the bottom half of each barrel would be full of sand, or it'd be full of something else, sawdust, and only the top part would actually be the flour. The meat that they were supposed to get was rotten, and these guys were just really crooked. And he highlighted the fact that, hey, we try and talk to these people, we try and negotiate and work with these people, and they just ignore us. So he talked quite a bit about the plight of the Indians and how they were suffering and starving, and they didn't have enough blankets to make it through the winter. But in the end he was like, please just listen to me, and we don't want fight, we don't want struggle. And that's what this guy was really all about in the latter part of his life, because he knew what would happen if the Sioux tried to resist, if the Sioux tried to fight back. So he's always about peace. In the Cooper Union speech he's talking about, I don't want trouble, I just want these problems to be fixed. Now this guy lived to be 89, and that's really impressive. And I want to go back again. Think about what happened to Crazy Horse. Bayonet to the back while he was in custody. Think about what happened to Sitting Bull. Shot by a Native American who was serving as an Indian agent. Think about Blackfoot and all these other tribal leaders who basically were killed while resisting at Wounded Knee and other places. Now Quanah Parker. Quanah Parker is, I've mentioned this before, one of my favorite characters from this era. He was a Comanche war chief, and he was a guy who was never outright defeated. I mean, he fought the U.S. government in the Red River Wars. He went down and did raids in Mexico, fought all the way up into the Texas Panhandle. He was never actually defeated, but he did surrender once he saw just what the inevitable outcome was, and saw just there's no reason to keep fighting. If we do, we're all going to die. But what I like about him is he kind of goes back. He gets sent to Fort Sill down near Lawton, Oklahoma. And what's interesting about him, his mother was actually white, kidnapped by the Comanche. So he's like half white. And a lot of the Comanche leaders, other chiefs, didn't like him for this. They kind of looked down his nose at that. But, I find him very interesting because, he went from being literally a Stone Age era type warrior, with the fighting and tactics and weapons, to actually being a statesman. This guy went to serve as a tribal judge. He invested a lot of money in the railroad, actually made quite a bit of cash. Now, he also refused to give up a lot of his Comanche characteristics and traits. Now, he did learn English so he could communicate with the white man, and he was a big champion of trying to defend Comanche rights and lands there in the end. But he refused to give up peyote. He's like, you're not going to get me to give up my peyote, it's one of my spiritual things. And he also was a polygamist. Now we know he had at least like 7 wives, at least, maybe even more. And he refused to give up that. He refused to give up the peyote. So he kind of was able to work with everyone, but also at the same time irritate everyone. Like I said, the other chiefs really, some of them they were 100% against him. So the Comanche tribe was quite divided there at the end, but he was always there to speak out on their behalf. So like I said, the tribe itself, if you run into Comanches, some like Quanah Parker, some do not. But he did work with the white man quite a bit there at the end. Also worked with other tribal leaders to the best of his abilities, and was able to live and die in relative peace down there in Fort Sill. And we'll finish off here talking about Chief Joseph of the Nez Perce. Now this is probably the most famous of all of these speeches. Now, Chief Joseph, they lived up the Nez Perce, up in the Pacific Northwest, up there in what is today Oregon, the California territory. And he tries to escape. He takes about 400 followers and tries to make it to Canada. Now, I've mentioned this in previous videos. I don't really understand why the United States government was insistent on stopping these people from escaping if that's what they wanted to do. You would think they'd, just get them out of our hair. Like I mentioned, the only thing that really makes sense is the control. We told you to stay here, so by golly, you're going to stay here. So Chief Joseph and about 400 followers try and make an escape. And of course they get pursued by the United States military. And they are surrounded and cut off at a place called Bear's Paw. And it's there that he has to bring together all of his chiefs and basically give them this speech. This is October the 5th, 1877. And he says, "Tell General Howard I know his heart. What he told me before, I have in my heart. I am tired of fighting. Looking Glass is dead. Tuhoho Soti," I actually had that pronounced it right the other day. "Tuhoho Soti is dead. The old men are all dead. It is the young men who say yes or no. He who led on the young men is dead. It is cold, and we have no blankets. The little children are freezing to death. My people, some of them, have run away to the hills and have no blankets, no food. No one knows where they are. Perhaps freezing to death. I want to have time to look for my children and see how many of them I can find. Maybe I shall find them among the dead. Hear me, my chiefs. I am tired. My heart is sick and sad. From where the sun now stands, I will fight no more forever." So as I said, this is probably the most famous of all of these speeches. They tried really hard. They tried to resist the government taking away their lands, and when they saw no other out, they actually tried to make their escape. They're like, well, we're going to go to Canada. And of course the U.S. military chases them down and forcibly subdues them. Now the Nez Perce are just nearly wiped out. I mean, this whole journey's bad enough, but then they're going to get moved around from reservation to reservation till eventually the few hundred remaining Nez Perce finally get sent back to their native homeland. So this speech is very depressing. It kind of shows the plight. It shows just the fact that there was nothing left that they could do but give up and say, I fight no more forever. So a lot of these guys tried very, very valiantly. A lot of them tried resisting the government. Some of them tried working with the government. But kind of the plight of the Native Americans is best expressed in a book written by Helen Hunt Jackson. She writes this book called A Century of Dishonor. And I want to point out that this was basically 100 years of U.S. government, Native American tribal relations and broken treaties and such that she highlights in this book. And realize a lot of what I talked about in this section hadn't even happened yet at the time she wrote this book. So this book could even be twice as long as it actually is. So this documented all of the injustices that were committed against the Native American Indians in this book called A Century of Dishonor. And I thought I had the date there that it came out. I'm wanting to say it was 1884. If not, I'll put a tag up there correcting myself. But I'm pretty sure this came out in 1884. So this would even be before Wounded Knee and some of those horrible events happened. So basically the point of these last few videos was just kind of showing you what the Native Americans went through and how their lifestyle and culture came to an end, and some of the leaders who tried various means to save their people or help their people. So that's it for this series. See, the video is just about the length that I wanted it. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, comment, share, and if you haven't already, please subscribe, because we're doing all kinds of U.S. history videos to help you, the students, pass those EOI instruction exams. So until next time, I'm Robert with Reading Through History. See ya!